Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to Mending Threads. This is your safe place and your stronghold for whole body wellness. This is a transformation series, mind, body, spirit. And today we have for transformation a manner of looking at communication. We want to look at culture and communication because within our society, communication is one of the mainstreams of our being connected. So, welcome to us. We have with us today our expert person on culture, history, author, pastor, and educator, Oswald Walker, Associate Pastor of the Shrine, with us this morning. So, welcome to you this morning.
How you doing, Doctor?
Thank you. Thank you. I forgot to put our title up on the screen, but I do know that our topic today on culture and communication is one that is at the forefront, not only because of the interaction that we have with other people in the community, other groups such as individuals with officers or persons of authority, but within our own family, and also especially with couples now in the forefront, listening to the violence and whatever. So, and on the workplace, in the front of people coming together, different groups. So I know the topic is right on target. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you, because you've done a lot of studying and writing, is first I thought maybe we would just clarify some ideas about what culture is. You know, what's your perspective on what culture is? People go like, well, what is culture? Is it such a thing? Or do we just throw this word around?
Mm-hmm. So, Dr. Maulana Karinga, one way he describes culture is he calls it. He doesn't use the phrase calling card, but basically it's the calling card of a people. It's what represents them. It's their resume. It's how the world sees them. Dress, ways of communicating, um, ways of entertaining. Spiritual practices, the foods they eat, all those things that come to define who and what a people are. Some cultures, they like spicier foods. Some cultures,
Mhm.
when they communicate, they're all on top of each other. Other cultures, they show respect by giving each other a certain level of distance. But all those little things, ways of interacting, create for a people their particular culture, their worldview, um, what they define as beautiful, who they define as their friends and as their enemies. All these things together combine to create um, what we now call culture. Oh, that's the black culture. Oh, that's the Latino, that the Caribbean culture. Um,
Mhm.
if you've ever been to the Caribbean
Mhm.
islands, you notice there's a different taste in the food, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
That's a cultural thing. If you go to places, especially where there are people of color, whether it's on the continent of Africa, Central South America, whatever, culturally, you see people more often than not coming together or trying to work together rather than doing their own things. That's a cultural.
Yes.
That's a
Yes.
cultural thing.
And
So I don't have an easy definition.
I think what you're saying, and you know what I saw speaking on or following on your talk, is I saw more people huddling. You know, like
Mm,
not only just on corners, but at the store when they would just start gravitating toward each other, and they would get in a little huddle and just talking. Yes, I thought that that was so unique. So, well, I see it here, but not as often. Mm.
Oh, we see it. I mean, you can be driving down Emancipation and you might see, or anywhere through the hood, and you see like just a gathering of brothers. It reminds me of the movie, Spike Lee's movie Do the Right Thing, where he had those three brothers that were just sitting on the corner and they were giving commentary to everything that was going on in the community. It made me laugh because I mean, I see that all the time. There's just something about
Hmm.
us coming together. When I worked at TSU, every time I left home, um, on Street Holman Street, right down the street from Holman Street Baptist Church, on this little
Yes,
piece of
yes,
land. There's always this huge group of us huddling.
yes,
Now, I'm not going to go into what potentially could be happening. Anyway, it's us huddling together on a regular basis, consistent basis. And that's
yes.
cultural. That's cultural.
So maybe we'll come back to that way because it's a special communication that goes on there too. So
Right.
yes. So I wanted to see today, I know with your background and your history in terms of looking at identity, I wanted to look at communication as an expression of who we think we are and who
Okay.
are we, and how do the words, and I know that there's a different pattern as to how we speak, the timing and all of that. So I wonder if you could just talk about communication as it relates to culture a little bit.
Definitely. So, uh, one of the things that I appreciated when I was going to school at UT, University of Texas. I went there in the mid to late '80s. Was if you're walking around campus and there was less than 3% African Americans on that campus, you walked around and you saw someone that looked like you. Oh, we're talking, even if it's a just slight head nod, and it
Yes.
was we were saying something without even saying something. I see you, I acknowledge you, I have your back, I'm with you, I understand you. Just little things like that. And then when we would get together on more, I guess, formal occasions, like every Thursday was soul night at the student union, or the different parties or study groups or whatever, it was like that communication literally gave us life, because there was so often, when you're in these predominantly white spaces, so
Mm-hmm.
often you are not seen, and when you're not seen, you are not communicated with. I will never forget this one particular class. Math was always the subject that it never came easy to me. I always had to work extremely hard at it, but I was good at it. I had to work for every math grade A I got. But there was this one particular class my freshman year. Um, we took our first test, and everybody is sitting there complaining about how hard it was, and then the professor is passing out the grades, and everyone is complaining not only about how hard the test was, but how horrible they did.
Mm-hmm.
And I started going through those same motions, like rubbing my head. Oh man, I did so bad. And you know, none of my white they weren't talking to me, but they wanted to talk to me then because they wanted to, I guess, verify that I did just as bad or worse than they did. And
Mm-hmm.
so somebody asked me how I did, and I'm like, oh man, I really could have done better. I think I just made a 97. Um, and I'm laughing inside when I'm saying this, but that was, they weren't even trying to talk to me or communicate with me. I was invisible to them until they saw that I was handling my business in class. And then everyone wanted to try to start talking to me. Oh yeah, can we
Right.
study together? No, I got my own group
Mm-hmm.
to study with. But th- I, I'm saying in a very long-winded way
The
that just
values. Mm-hmm.
just communicating, just speaking to one another can really, really give life. And it's one of the things that kind of bothers me when I am on the University of Houston campus, um, is that I don't have that same interaction. I see someone else, a brother or sister, I'm expecting some type of communication, and I don't get that. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I did get it, and I do get it whenever I go up to the African American Studies office, but just walking around campus, no. And so for years, I worked both at U of H and TSU. And at TSU, one of the joys of working there, especially in those last few years, was how the students would seem to go out of their way to speak to adults, whether they were faculty, staff, whatever. I mean, it was just so beautiful and so refreshing. And to get that simply by opening your mouth and recognizing somebody else, that
Hmm.
says something to me.
But isn't that a part of your belief about? I used to have a lady that lived in the neighborhood, and if I'd walk in and didn't speak in her home, she would say to me, she would say things like, we used to call her mother because she was like the mother of the neighborhood. And
Mm-hmm.
she would say, I didn't sleep with you last night. I wasn't at your house. I mean,
Right.
real sarcastic, like, but you knew
Mm-hmm.
there was another thing I wanted to talk about, but you knew she was connecting with you on a love level,
Right.
but she was also instructing you. But the
Right.
thing is that when you approach a person, she taught, and my mother would say, I don't know why, as you're growing up, you just don't do the things that you taught. But when you approach an individual, it's respect to wish them a good day, to
Mm.
say good morning. It's not like you're having a good morning. It is that you are taught these things and that this is a part of what you have to give or be concerned about another person, you know.
So I love that. I love that. And so just a few days ago, I was interviewing someone for a spotlight article for the Defender, young man by the name of Anthony Collier. Just a real sharp brother doing great things in the community, community leader, all those things. Um, and he's received accolades and awards for doing this, that, and the other. But it's all about service and helping folk and all that. And I asked him because somehow he got involved in this project that allowed him to be part of a team that won an international um, business competition. International
Hmm.
business competition. He was a teenager. I'm like, how in the hell? He said, well, um, when I was on the debate team at TSU, uh, Gloria Baptiste, I don't remember her last. She has two last names, but she's the coach of TSU's debate team. And he
Hmm.
said that she would all every day she would talk to him about the late Mickey Leland. And one of the things Mickey Leland did was speak to everybody.
Yes.
He said she told him wherever he went, he spoke to everybody. If he's walking, how you doing?
You
If
speak.
someone comes
That's
into the
right. That's.
office, how
Hmm.
you doing? How you doing? And so this young man, Anthony Collier, he said, "Well, hey, I wanted to be like him." And so he would do that whether he was walking down the famous Tiger Walk or whether he found himself somewhere else. But one particular day, he just spoke to someone. This guy, can't remember what country he was from, but he just said hello. And they got into this conversation. They hit it off. And long story short, they go into business together. And through that business, this teenager wins this international business competition. And to him, it just made sense. You speak to people. You speak to people.
Hmm.
Like you said, it's a level of respect. But on another level, you just never know what doors it can open.
Right. And then you feel more connected with the individual. I can go into HEB. And one of the things that I realized more so now than I paid attention to before is what you mentioned about the head nod or the smile. So
Hmm.
since I'm much older, I noticed that the older people, particularly when you walk in, particularly African American, they'll kind of look at you and go, "Good morning," or something. Okay, and so I own that. I say, "Okay, then I'm good." And then, but also what I notice is wherever I go in a store, wherever I am, people generally will have eye contact with you, particularly African Americans and Hispanics.
Yeah.
When you walk through the door and they pass you, they're going to look at you and have some sense of acknowledgement if
Yes.
we pay attention.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really important. That's like talking. That's a method of communicating that sends a signal of relational connection.
Nonverbal communication, and
Nonverbal community, yes.
in a world that tries to treat us as if we are invisible and as if we don't matter, those small moments of communication matter. they make
Mm-hmm.
they make a difference. And that's a part of culturally interacting that allows us to lift each other up, to just show support, even in a small way.
And I also looked at, I started maybe like 2 years ago paying
Mm-hmm.
attention to wellness,
Mm-hmm.
and that part of connection helps to generate wellness. When I started asking people, when you moved to Houston, what was something that made you feel better? People say when they move they get a cold or they have some illness because of the stress of
Mm-hmm.
relocating and adjusting, or even if you move in a, but they say when the neighbors or people in the community acknowledge them and reach out, they begin to feel well. So I'm looking at that sense of nonverbal acknowledgement and a way of inclusion. It's a part of helping you become more resilient.
Yeah.
See, and
Yeah.
that's what I've begun to notice. Um, and I ask people, I start asking them, when did you feel like you were part of this community? And they say, well, when someone really began to, when the more people acknowledge me as part of the community, I feel well, I feel adjusted, I feel more connected. And so it's something about this communication, nonverbal and verbal communication, that's associated with the wellness.
So there's a book. Um, I don't even know if I still have a copy of it. Emotional leadership, either emotional leadership or emotional intelligence. Um,
Yes.
but the book talks about how in Western societies we try to make emotion seem as if it is less than or less important than rationality and rational thought. Um,
Hmm.
but emotion um, just is like an expression of those connections that we have with one another. And when we
Hmm.
are healthy emotionally, our rational becomes even more acute and better and sharper. Everything becomes better. Um, and I say that because, right now on the Christian calendar, we are in the season of Pentecost. The season of Pentecost um, was the season when the church was founded. Uh, I'm every, Even non-Christians are familiar with the upper room, right? The upper room experience,
Yes.
um, where Jesus has been murdered, assassinated, lynched. The disciples scatter, but then they all come back together. They're in Jerusalem. They start meeting in the upper room and they're praying and crying and reliving things. And then all of a sudden, um, they feel in that space the rush of a mighty wind. And according to scripture, tongues of fire rest above each head. They're all filled with the Holy Spirit. Well, when most preachers preach about that moment, they talk about how the disciples were then speaking in tongues and being able to communicate with all these different people. But if you just went a little further in the story, it talks about how after that moment they were they were filled with the same power and ability that Jesus had. And Jesus spoke of this while he was alive. He said, what I can do you can do, and even greater things shall you do. After that upper room experience, um, according to scripture. You know, they were so filled with this power that just their shadow could heal. But it was after that moment that they started preaching and people started joining. And according to the history of the church, that was the founding of the church. And what I think is even more important is Acts 2, verse 40 through 47, it talks about
Mm.
what they did with that feeling. So it wasn't just that they caught the Holy Spirit, caught the Holy Ghost, and started running around or dancing around the church, singing and shouting. It changed the way they acted. And so what the scripture says, Acts 2:40 through 47, it talks about how they came together as a group. They ate and fellowshipped as one. They gave as they were able. They received as they had need. They looked out for one another. All these things talk about the fact that,
Mm.
when spirit really gets a hold of you, you don't run around and try to make yourself look better than other people. it makes you want to connect with other
to
people.
other people.
It makes you
Mm-hmm.
want to live in a way that you have like a collective consciousness, um, where you see God in someone else, and so you can't just treat them any kind of way. You have to treat them the way you yourself want to
Yes.
be treated.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. I read that. I never really thought about it from that level. And at that point, that's good. That's right on target. So, but so listen. So, the man told me. Oh, I forgot to tell you that I was identified by the National Association of Multicultural Counseling as a what do they call it? Lifetime Achievement Award. And so, listen. So, you know what the man
Go ahead.
told me? He
What?
said, "You know, you have always been an old person." I was like, geez, come on now, wait. He says, because, now I want to say this, because he said that one of the things that we had to check is that what you were just speaking about. He says you were always trying to
Uh oh.
and connect. That's what he said. He said you were bringing. So he brought up, and so there were things, and sometime I'll tell you about it. But he went on and told me. He says, "Well, one of the things is that you never stop. So you seem to have gotten some spiritual something from
Hmm.
somewhere that
Hmm.
that people identify. But what you did was you took the spiritual thing and gave it a form." And he said,
Wow.
and so eight people came together, and I remembered that all the way through the years. Well, it just blew me over. But what
Wow.
you're saying is what they said of the people that they had identified. Okay,
Yeah.
from cultural, how looking at how you bridge your cultures, right?
And it's funny
So,
that I'm sorry. Go ahead.
go on, no. Mm-hmm.
I was going to say it's funny that you shared that and what he said when he described you, right? Because just before you said that, I was sitting here thinking you remind me of the central character in the story of Stone Soup. Have you heard that story before?
Sort of. I know, not the whole story, but I do know
But
the thing about
but
stones.
you
Mm-hmm.
are the central character. So this one town, everyone is going hungry. I don't remember if it was a drought or famine or whatever. So everyone's in bad shape. And so this one sister, she decides to set up this huge pot right in the middle of town and start boiling some water. She puts like two or three stones in it, and people
Yes.
just start asking, what are you doing? Well, I'm making some stone soup. And then she tastes it. She said, but it would taste a whole lot better if it had some carrots. And someone said, well, I have some carrots. And she just kept doing this. Maybe if we just had some potatoes. And someone else said, well, I
Yes,
don't have much of
yes,
anything, but I got potatoes. And then someone would
yes,
bring some celery and some onions and some this, that, and the other. And they would all throw it in the pot. Then all of a sudden, there was something there was food to feed the entire village, and it was all
yes.
because this one sister had the forethought of how I could bring people together. So that's you.
That's what and I have that drawing, but I never really outside look back at me like that. But he went
Hmm.
on to tell me that, and so the thing that I have about locking arms, and
Hmm.
I believe that healing somehow it would come if we could all lock arms for the same thing that we're all speaking about, instead of just trying to um, compete, so to speak, but
Dr.
take
Lewis,
every.
that's cultural. Dr. Lewis, that's cultural. That whole
Yes, that's
locking
what.
of the arms, the creating
Mhm.
of a sacred circle, um,
Yes,
that is as old as African people are. We believe that there is power in that circle. The circle itself just symbolically represents there's no beginning and there's no
no
end.
end.
That this thing, this feeling, this power can last forever when we come when we come
But I
together.
tell you one thing, it's so hard. It's like going against talking about stones. It seems that way. But it seems that it would be so evident. It
Yeah,
would just, if you look around you, it would be so all healing comes about even when there's a trauma or crisis, when we all pull together. So how is it when the crises let down some, then we go back to, or it's difficult for us to see that? And so I question, I know it has to do with the level of acculturation
yeah.
somehow, uh, but it would seem with religion and the belief and the practice of understanding what it is, it would seem like there would be a locking of arms of all the church. You see what I'm saying? Of
It, it,
persons
it's
who have that belief.
it seems that way, but there's I would contend that there is a war that is going on with each and every one of us because of that acculturation that you talked about. Scientists say that if you want to learn a new behavior, just do the same thing for 21 days in a row or something like that. Well, imagine being conditioned not just for 21 days, not just for 21 years, but for darn near
200.
21 generations,
Yes.
uh, being being beaten for coming together, uh, being being punished for working with one another, being taught every single day for hundreds of years that you can't trust people that look like you. You've got to look out only for yourself. It was the researcher John O'Killens that said, if you want to make a human being a slave, tell them or convince them to look out only for themselves. And
Mm-hmm.
it was that operant conditioning that those who sought to enslave us took human beings and they took them down to seasoning farms. That's what the islands were for. Seasoning
Mm-hmm.
farms of operant conditioning to try to beat the communalism or the community aspect out of us, where we would only be looking out for ourselves. But that went on for generations. And so we still live with the lingering effects of that. So you talk to some black folk, they're like, well, I don't want to work with anyone else. I don't want to. And so it was real powerful when you said it seems like it would only make sense that we work together, that we lock
Mm-hmm.
arms, but that conditioning is still there. Um, Dr. Joy Leary calls it post traumatic slavery syndrome. Dr. Naeem Akbar calls it internalized oppression. Reverend Albert B. Cleage Jr., he calls it niggerization. But it's all talking about these lingering impacts of our enslaved experience. So that's what we have to battle in order to recognize what is also still in us. Because there are those moments when we do reach out and we
Yes.
recognize that power. But though that's the war that's going on inside of us.
Mm-hmm. So the guy that I studied with, Malefe Asante,
Yes.
he talked about how all of this relates to how we talk.
Mm,
He said that we talk, how we use the verbs, that our verbs show relational,
hmm,
and that's say for instance, we be, and he went on to look at the language that we originally used showed actions and connections, and
hmm,
everything wanted to be an in, an s, or whatever. And so he started talking about Afrocentricity in language.
hmm,
And I remember him saying that it was hard to teach, to reteach in school, because we were thinking that everything was connecting. Like I'm feeling, not I felt, like in the sentence. So it would constantly always be ing or s, having action now.
hmm,
Okay, that kind of thing. And so so he was saying that was why that we needed to have teachers in the school that really understood that, so that the psyche could come together around being here and using a language in a certain way, but still not separating yourself when you're talking.
Yeah.
You see, and so I always found that that was most interesting as I listened to little young children now. You know, when
Hmm.
they want to talk about I be and I this, you know, that kind of thing, as I am.
I need that information. So that Dr. Malefi Asante out of Temple
Yes,
University.
he talked
Okay.
about Afrocentricity, what that was all about, and he brought in the first idea about, if I'm not mistaken, about language and structures and how we talk on different levels. Like we'll talk on when we talk about things are more than skin deep or something.
Hmm.
Um, he says when we listen, we're going to all be talking on two levels. We're going to talk on what you see and what you experience at the same time. And so, whether it's said or not, it is that we know that this is our reality. But
That
this
has
is
to
what
be
we,
that has to be cultural because
that's what he's,
that's one of the
mhm,
ways that Jesus was described. He was described as speaking on multiple levels all the
multiple
time.
levels.
Like
That's right.
they say he was a teacher, right? He was always speaking in parables. So on one level, it's this surface level. He's explaining, and he would use the language that the people that he lived around understood. So many of his stories, he talks about farming or he talks about this or that. So on one level, it's real basic, but on another deeper spiritual level, there's an entirely different message going on.
Hmm.
Uh, Yeah, this is all cultural. This is
Yes.
all us.
And that
This is.
we'll talk on, say, for instance, in a conversation like we are doing right now.
Hmm.
When you're speaking with a person from a similar background, if not all African Americans don't speak that way, or all Hispanics don't, but it has something to do with the acculturation level. But the thing is that we will speak on circular. So we'll start off talking about something, but we will both know how that topic of behaving relates to spiritual, relates to communication, and then we'll come back around together and
Hmm.
talk about it. And so many people, many of my friends from different cultures, it drives them crazy because they want you to talk about one topic and talk all the way through. But most persons of color will see the thread of connection between all of the different topics and come back around, even in writing.
Hmm.
So we will write, but we have to be mindful where we are when we write so that we write about one thing. But generally, culturally, if we write, we will find the emotional part, the spiritual part of whatever we're talking, and we'll begin to speak about that in the writing and then go back to the topic. But most of my friends from other cultures, they want you to talk about that topic and logical thinking all the way through.
And that's why our meetings and our church services take so long because we go we
That's
go through the
right.
whole thing. I'm on weekly meetings of our church pastors, right? We start the meeting and it's 10, 15, 20 minutes before we get into the business of the meeting because that's a whole part of the communication.
Yes. It's the connection and the relational part to make the second part more meaningful. That's what
Right.
Malefic was saying. He says the timing was different.
Yeah.
The whole thing, the one is the surface and one is the meaning, you see. And so you have to get this ready for the meaning so that
Yeah.
the right meaning will surface. And so it was very interesting in terms of what he called deep structures and surface and linear speaking and circular talking and the use of verbs and how we use verbs um, to express love and connection with each other. And so I think that, and then I think that sometimes when we marry, you think about it in terms of other relationships, communication in the workplace, And what if you marry somebody that speaks differently?
Mm,
Um, or you have to spend all day with somebody who is talking, but really speaking on different levels. There's talking on one level, but they have a need of another level.
yeah,
If
yeah.
you could,
And all this just reminds me of just why it's so important that we really put some time into thinking about ways to improve our group interactions. And
mm-hmm,
what you have been saying um, is communication is foundational to all of it. I would add, well, this is a huge part of the communication, though, that kind of collective mindset, collective working responsibility. That's one of the Kwanzaa principles, right? But it's a group approach to problem solving. And when we can communicate, then we can start taking those group approaches to problem solving. I can't tell you how many times I've read about or seen examples of a community that is suffering some issue, some problem, um, drug sales or this or that uh, food desert, whatever the issue is. At some point, you have people in the community that recognize this problem is bigger than my individual self. And so I have to reach out to others so that collectively we can bring about a solution. And so I read here how this one community starts up an urban garden, or I read over there about how this other community has created community patrols or community watch, or this
yes,
other community, they go beyond just a community watch. They actively go up to the individuals who are bringing harm into the community and talk to them as if they are human beings. And
yes,
what they found was the people that they approached, they just haven't had that experience in their life where someone actually looked them in the eye, talk to them as if they are a human being of worth and value, and just say, hey, what you are doing is bringing um, violence or bringing harm to our community. We need you to do something else. But over and over again, you see these really powerful examples of individuals who recognize that they can do more together than they can apart. So that kind of group approach to problem solving. And, just for a historical example, you can look at Ida B. Wells. I mean, we call her this one woman movement against lynching. But really what she was trying to do was get black communities to approach it from a community perspective. And so she promoted this idea that every black household should have a bell on its porch or somewhere in the house and some guns, so that if a lynch mob or folk trying to do your family wrong came your way, you ring that bell, all your black neighbors hear, and they come to your defense. So she's thinking
mm-hmm,
collectively, we got this issue. The government's not doing anything about it. The police aren't doing anything about it. Blah, blah. Okay, well, what are we going to do about it? But it
yes,
but that came out of this mindset of what can we do collectively? It's our
yes,
responsibility. It's our responsibility to do this.
mm-hmm. Especially when we think about our children, we keep waiting on someone else to look at our community and our children and how we do. But I think it's like having that idea, and even as you approach another individual. I'll give you an example. There's a homeless guy. He's not really homeless, but
Mm-hmm.
he lives somewhere, and I can't figure out where he lives. But he passes down my street, and most people, they won't talk to him. They won't look at him.
Mm-hmm.
And so somehow, he would speak to me as I'm coming out of the driveway or the street. So, I said, this is a human being. I spoke to him. So I started speaking to him, and he comes down. So here was somebody at my door. And here comes the little man down the street. Do you know what he
Mm-hmm.
did? He says, are you all right? You know what I'm saying? He knew that
Mm-hmm.
that person should not have been in my door.
Right.
And
Right.
he was taking care of
Right.
And every day he comes and he's walking down, he's checking neighbors, he's checking to see how he's feeling some sense of responsibility, as
Yeah.
you spoke, to the people in the community. But the people in the community, for the most part, are not feeling a responsibility. So that's where it's broken, you see.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I stopped to talk to him one day at the corner, and I said, "Well, you live in this neighborhood?" And he said, "Yes, I live." He named where he lived, and somehow he named the house. So I said, "Well, it must not be far." And so I just wanted to say something to him. And then I told him,
Hmm.
I said, "Thanks for the other day, you know." And he just made him feel, you could just see the expression on his face. And so sometimes I think, you mentioned looking at people, and I think we need to sometimes not be so afraid and look at the
Yeah.
person. And sometimes the person just needs you to look at them to validate that they are a human being, you
There is a
know.
science behind the importance of affirmation. We are affirmational people. We need, you know, folks say, I don't need thanks. I don't need appreciation. Yes, you do. We all do. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you may not need your name in lights after you do, you know, a good work or something, but we all need to be affirmed. We all, it helps in our mind, body, spirit development to be affirmed. We were created for connection, so we need one another. And I was just thinking about other ways that I mean, that was really some problem solving, right? You know, he was like, because I feel a connection to you, I'm going to add my voice to make sure that you are okay. He was engaged in problem solving. And then
Right.
when you acknowledged him, you you were engaging in problem solving because you were
Mm-hmm.
affirming that action. And those
Yes.
actions that lift up community need to be affirmed. We need to affirm those
Mm-hmm.
things. I think I mentioned last week that African people created the spiritual technology that we call rituals. Rituals could be just going to an altar and saying a prayer. It's worship service on Sundays. It's um, it's funerals, it's weddings, it's baptisms. All these things are rituals, but they were born out of this idea of we have a collective responsibility to make sure that we are all okay. And
Mm-hmm.
one thing that we all have in common is we can all get caught up in the busyness of life that takes us off our course, that takes us off the course that God has for us. And we get so busy and we can get depressed and down and forget who we are. Ritual allows us to slow down long enough to be reminded
Mm-hmm.
of those things that are most important. And in several African nations, those rituals were created for the specific purpose of making sure that whatever broken relationships that there are in the community can get
Mm-hmm.
fixed, so that
That's
as
right.
a community we can move forward in
Mm-hmm.
a healthy way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but all this is, you know, we're talking about cultural ways that we can improve how we live together. You mentioned communicating, just simply speaking and affirming one
Mm-hmm.
another.
Mm-hmm.
And I shared the whole, we have to live the Pentecost example, right, with a collective consciousness. And then a third thing is approach issues with this sense of collective work and responsibility. We've got to feel responsible, not just for ourselves, but for each other. And what can I bring to the table? Like,
Yes.
I don't have your gifts, but I have the gifts that God gave me. So
Yes.
what can I offer to make this?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it was so beautiful that you thanked that brother, because he doesn't have the money, he doesn't have this, that, or the other, but he
Mm-hmm.
used the thing that he had, his voice, and whoever was on your
That's
porch
right. That's
recognized that,
right.
okay, somebody's here watching me.
Mm-hmm.
I can't be
Mm-hmm.
doing all kinds of nefarious stuff. So he used what he had, and you affirm that. And we have to
Mm-hmm.
be in the habit of doing that more often.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to I'm trying to not be in my own self all the time, like getting in the car, doing whatever, trying to speak to people. I'm really trying to do that because sometimes we get so busy doing things, like trying to put stuff here, doing this, doing that, and then we forget to look around and do that. But I generally see people as I'm passing them. But what I really mean is being conscious about some things that that you're remiss about
Mm-hmm.
as part of your own personal growth, a part of extending yourself. And one concern I have, so what I did was I'm working on what they call community connect. So it is that I am praying over this and meditating over this, the better way and the best way that I'm asked to bring people together. And so I'm seeing how I can do this, and it looks like that's a possibility, especially during gentrification, because there's so many people losing their homes. They're giving them up because the taxes are going up, and
Mm-hmm.
nobody's taking care of them. And it came to me because of my circumstance. So my house is older, and I had an older meter.
Mm-hmm.
And the people came in when I thought I smelled gas. I made a mistake, and they took my meter. But
Mm.
when they take your meter, they cut it off at the street. So I have no gas.
Hmm.
So now I got to repipe this. Well, I started calling around, and my geez, all of these little people didn't have gas.
Wow.
Okay, so when the electric went out, I happened to have had my gas then, but
Mm-hmm.
these people had to leave home for a length of time because they
Mm-hmm.
had no gas and they couldn't get the pipes in because of the cost to repipe their home. Do you
Mm-hmm.
understand what I'm saying? And so now many of them are giving up their homes. So there's nobody really thinking about them
Yeah.
to help them save their home, to connect, because with gentrification, the people are calling to buy their homes all during the day. And
Yeah.
there's nobody calling in the community, reaching out, saying, this is what we can do to help you keep your home.
Right.
And so they're feeling like an island, you know, by themselves around all of the people that they know.
And that's why what you said earlier, that whole positive acculturation is so important, or socialization, however you want to describe it. We've got to relearn how to become a people and how to live. We've got to relearn how to live together. Like,
Yes,
if you go to a black church, you've heard of the benevolence offering. The
yes.
benevolence offering is you give your pennies, your dollars, and that benevolence offering goes to whoever is in need that week or that month. Well, that came straight out of enslavement. We called it mutual aid societies, where black folk who were enslaved or just out of enslavement, we would throw our pennies together, and whoever found themselves in a difficult way or difficult situation that week or that month, that person would receive the support. Um, and again, it goes back to culture. It goes back to this idea of collective work and responsibility. We've got to be there for each other, and that's what you're talking about. You're saying if
Mm-hmm.
we operate with that mindset, then
Yes.
we could bring solutions to these problems, like that
We
gas
can bring
problem that you were
solution.
talking about.
Yes.
But we've got to
Yes.
operate with that mindset. We got to bring that back.
That's right. And I think with the younger persons, because our young people, um, seldom, I remember growing up and my mother, and I'll always remember the oldest woman in our neighborhood was Mrs. Smith. We had to, we were required to go and find out what Miss Smith needed. And we were required to take her garbage can in. We were required to pick up her trash. We were
Hmm.
required to run errands for her. it was expected that the children in the neighborhood would help the older people in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm finding is that the families now are not encouraging their children to recognize seniors or nor to help them. So what they're prioritizing would be how much money you have.
Mm.
So there's a whole change in relational activities between generations.
Yeah.
And so there was years ago, we were talking during our intergenerational program on Saturdays. They were talking about how now, years ago, people would not put their grandparents in a nursing home. It was expected that that person would live within the home with them
Mm-hmm.
and that everybody would work to take care of them. Now that there's a disconnect of relation and connection because the parents are doing more for the young people than the young people are doing to come together with their families. Let me
Mm.
just give you an example. The young people that I'm working in terms of treatment, the mom goes upstairs, the mother goes upstairs to take the child that's 14 years old a bowl of cereal. So now, when you begin, and he's not sick, and he can walk, and he has his right mind about him.
Then let him bring his behind downstairs to get the bowl of cereal.
That's right. What I'm saying. Now, what are you teaching them in terms of how they relate to you? The communication non-verbally
Mm-hmm.
that's telling them how to connect and what the priorities are. Okay, and so this is of major concern in terms of our future and getting connected for now and the future. You see, what does that mean? What are we doing?
I would throw out a word of optimism that I see a lot of young people, millennials and Generation Z, who are going into business these days, and they're going into business not simply to make profit, but they view their business as their social action, their community service. I mean, several businesses do this. One is Melodrama right there on Alameda. The
Yes.
owner of that store, she's not only you know runs a profitable business, but she's always finding ways to give back to always. And
Mm-hmm.
I had to interview her on multiple occasions for different articles. And every time I talk to her, she says, that's a part of the business model. That's just who I am. And when I talked to Marcus Davis at the Breakfast Club, he says the exact same thing. He says, when I give money towards scholarships or towards this community group or that community group, it's not giving back. It's part of the process because these are the
Yes.
same people that come in and allow me to have a successful business.
Right.
So why on earth would I not? Because if I'm not giving them support, I'm breaking the chain. I'm breaking the
That's
cycle.
right. That's right.
So I
Mm-hmm.
guess what I'm saying is I am seeing more and more examples of younger folk who recognize that we've got to have this, we've got to have this collective mindset. And when you were talking, I thought about, the street where my parents lived. If a neighbor was going out of town, everyone knew, okay, we're going to get their mail, we're going to get their paper, so they don't collect and people know, oh, they're out of town, we can go
Yes.
rob them
Yes.
now. But it was just small things like that. We're going to look out for the well-being of each other.
Of our neighbor. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's something that we can continue and foster, and maybe something during our parenting classes we can bring up and have them to do that. So I think we've talked about something really good today and very strong. And I think the summarization that you gave in terms of responsibility, what did you say again? Sharing responsibility, caring
Yeah,
for
yeah.
the other, um, demonstrating a communal sense, um, thinking, connecting with others in our community. that kind of thing, and also expressing and acknowledging others daily,
Yeah.
sharing yourself with that person. I think if we could begin to just do that for resilience and healing, those
Yeah.
kinds of nonverbal and verbal communication, we'd be right getting back on the track, as so to speak.
I'm
Hmm.
just gonna I'll say this and I'm done. Um, in the like the group meetings that we would have at my church, um, the group meeting that was most satisfying was those ones where we showed appreciation to one another. So we sit in a circle, then someone would get in the middle and they would have to look eye to eye with somebody, and that person would tell them what they appreciated about them. Then they have to look
Yes,
at someone else, and that next person, I appreciate this about you, and the next person, I
yes.
appreciate this about you. That affirmation, we've got to rebake that into the cake of the Black community. That's got to be part of what we do on a daily
Well, let
basis.
me get started right now. So you know what I appreciate about you?
Lord, Lord.
I appreciate, I appreciate your genuineness about the
Mm,
study that you have. I
mm,
appreciate how well versed you are in your topic. I appreciate your care about the community, your demonstrated care within the community. I appreciate your well versedness of the word in the Bible. I appreciate the integration that you have with all
Lord,
of
Lord.
this and, and how you share it. So I just want to say that.
Well,
Okay, then.
can I share some words too? Like I talk to my wife about you all the time. I appreciate your you have this can't stop, won't stop attitude about you. You are always going, thinking, how can I bring people together? Deloitte Parker must love you because that's one of his favorite phrases.
I know.
Let Harambe, let's pull together. Let's bring people together. And that's what you are all about. All, always cheerful, always willing to go the extra mile, always willing to work with folk like myself who you need something on this day and we taking forever and we forget to get back with you, but you are always there, steady, bringing, pulling people together, finding new ways to connect community. And you got this dogged spirit, positive spirit. Every meeting I've ever been with you, it's been a positive experience. Even when we're dealing with issues and problems, you come at it with this positive energy that just reminds me, man, it ain't so bad. We can get through this. We can make this thing happen.
Yes,
So
yes.
you're just this
Well,
beautiful spirit.
thank you. But Deloitte Parker and I, we seldom can get together because I guess we're rolling life, but we're always in the same direction. So one
Mm-hmm.
day, I we had a senior dinner. I sponsored a senior dinner, and I called him, and we got all the seniors together in the community there on Blodgett, the
Mm-hmm.
community church across from Texas Southern.
Mm-hmm.
We bust people in, and he and I had the best program for community leaders and seniors that you had ever seen. And we had people coming in cars and buses, and we put on the program, and then we also served. We were the ones that served
Yeah.
the people in recognition to them, and we gave out. I think that was one of our earlier Healing Rocks award, which we'll do again this year. But we give Healing Rocks, and actually we give them rocks for being a foundation, and so strong in the community. But
So
I will
real.
always remember that time with Delord Parker
Yeah.
that we did that. So that was most interesting. I
So
want to
real.
thank you today, Doc Walker, for being with us. And I know that the words that you gave us today will carry us this week. Okay, because you gave me something in Acts that I'm gonna go back and read,
Check
and
it out.
I'm gonna put some legs to that Acts.
All right
Okay
now.
then. Okay then. So and you have a good week, and everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Remember this: renew beliefs, rebuild faith, and reconnect families and communities. For it is not the circumstance you meet or stances you meet, it is the manner in which you respond that determines health, happiness, and success. Please sign up this week for our program studying our culture with Doc Walker. Go to wrc-houston.com and please sign up. And you'll also have a time to speak with him if you can sign up with that class because we're arranging that. And I'll look forward to talking with you later. Also, our mental health coaching, you may sign up for that because we are going to connect the community around whole body wellness, mental health, and physical health. Thank you so much. Same time, same place, same station.